Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Northwest Newsweek. I'm Riley McManus. Ontario's mining minister came down to Thunder Bay this week for the first time since he was appointed. George Pirie was here alongside Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy and local MPP Kevin Holland to announce increased funding for the Ontario Junior Exploration Program. Pirie was also asked about the province's controversial plans to develop the Ring of Fire mining area. Jess Clement reports.
We talked about how important mining is, but it is truly critical now. If we're going to achieve our climate goals, and in fact, if we're going to achieve the goals of the next generation to a cleaner and safer environment and living, it starts here. The minerals have to come out of the ground.
Minister George Pirie says finding and extracting minerals like nickel and cobalt are necessary to support the growing supply chain for electric vehicles and create jobs for Northern and Indigenous communities. Minister of Finance Peter Bethlenfalvy reciprocated those sentiments and says Ontario must increase its self-sufficiency.
Northern Ontario and the critical minerals found here are a key part of our plan to do just that. So, ladies and gentlemen, we believe we have the right plan, led by the right Premier, with the right team, and together we will continue and together build a strong Ontario that we can all be proud of.
Pirie also answered questions about the Ring of Fire mining area and the plans to build roads to the remote region. The mining minister was asked about how the Ford government will address the concerns coming from First Nations who oppose the road's construction.
Webequie and Martin Flowers are leading the consultation process with all their communities in their region. So they, in fact, are undertaking the duty to consult in their areas. This is all about, seizing on a generational opportunity that the Indigenous people see happening within their traditional territories.
Beth Boone, special advisor to the chief of Gulf Bay First Nation, came out to the media conference to voice her concern about mining in other Indigenous lands without consultations with Indigenous people. She says that the process is to continue in a meaningful way, then First Nation communities should be brought along right away.
We don't have an environmental assessor on staff. We don't have a biologist. We don't have a mining technician. We don't have those type of people at the ready who would be able to digest what sometimes are binders and binders of information. So if you would like, and if you're serious about undertaking work inside First Nation territory, then bring them in on the front side.
After the conference, Pirie agreed to speak to Boone about Gulf Bay's concerns. Jessica Clement, TBT News.
Meanwhile, Kiiwetinoong MPP Sol Mamakwa challenged the Ford government at Queen's Park this week about mining exploration happening in Nan territory without the consent of Niskandiga First Nation. The issue came up during question period and was answered by Indigenous Services Minister Greg Rickford.
Ontario is allowing mining claims across Treaty 9 territory that affect the rights and interests of First Nations without their free, prior, and informed consent. In a recent letter to the Ring of Fire Metals, Niskandiga stated, "No other government or First Nation can rewrite history to take away our rights in our homelands." Why is Ontario undermining Niskandiga's rights and interests in their own territories?
To the contrary, we're working with Niskandiga First Nation, as we are working with First Nations communities across Northern Ontario on various resource projects and on various pieces of legacy infrastructure which will enhance the social, health, and economic opportunities that are available to their communities, Mr. Speaker. We take our Section 35 responsibilities seriously with respect to the duty to consult, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to engage and work with communities, build consensus to provide an opportunity for a better life for people in Indigenous communities across Northern Ontario.
OPP in Terrace Bay are investigating a disturbing incident last Saturday in which 2 young children and another person were attacked by a group of dogs. A neighbor who heard the screaming says he jumped over a fence into the family's yard to help the mother save the children from the dogs, which are believed to be Rottweiler mixes. The mauling left the children with what police describe as serious and life-altering injuries, and one of them was reportedly airlifted to southern Ontario for treatment. There's no word on what's been done with the dogs, but OPP say there is no further threat for public safety. The inquest looking into the 2017 death of Nibinamik artist Moses Beaver got underway in Thunder Bay this week. Tuesday was the first day of witness testimony, as the 5-member jury was able to hear from health experts who were in contact with Beaver in the days leading up to his death. Jess Clement reports.
Renowned woodland artist Moses Beaver had been experiencing a mental health crisis in Nibinamik before he was placed under arrest by officers with the Anishinaabe Police Service and then transferred to the Thunder Bay District Jail. He died at the regional hospital on February 13, 2017, after being transferred from the jail. The first witness at the inquest was Paul Hesch, a nurse at Nibinamik Health Center, who helped treat Beaver 1 month before his death. NAN Deputy Grand Chief Annabetty Achneepineskum attended the inquest to show support to the family and community, as well as those who have died in similar situations.
I have a vast interest in terms of the lack of resources and services for individuals that are struggling with mental health issues. And in this particular case, it was quite obvious that there was a lack of resources and services for Moses Beaver.
Hesch stated that due to Beaver's mental health crisis, he needed to be evacuated from the community, either by medevac or normal plane, to Thunder Bay, where he would be properly treated. Achneepineskum says it's concerning how much has to go into getting residents of remote communities adequate health care.
It's very disturbing to hear about the policies and procedures in terms of just getting someone transferred out of the community into a medical facility. Because as you know, in our communities, we don't have the resources and the services to be able to help someone, especially in this case.
The inquest is expected to last a total of 3 weeks, with the 5 jury members hearing from more than 30 witnesses, with the goal to understand the events that led to Beaver's death, as well as make recommendations aimed at preventing future deaths from occurring in similar circumstances. Jessica Clement, TBT News.
A major fire consumed a lakefront dance hall in the Kenora area last weekend. The blaze broke out at Lac Loup Landing, a cabin rental property near the Manitoba border. The owner of Lac Loup Landing calls the fire a devastating loss, but says thankfully no one was injured. Volunteer fire crews were on the scene just before 9 p.m. on April 14th, and the building was leveled by the time the flames were brought under control before midnight. Area Fire Chief Barry Bennett says it was a community effort, with neighboring fire crews from nearby Mackenzie coming out to help. The historic 4,000 square foot wood building was a hub for community life in the 1950s and 60s and was still being used for weddings and other events. Students in KI are finally heading to class in the First Nations brand new school. The remote community on Big Trout Lake received $42 million in federal funding to build the school back in 2019. And although COVID set back the project a year and a half behind schedule, class is now in session. Lee Noonan has more.
Construction of the Aglis Chapman Education Center in Kitchenamekusibaniniwug was completed in the fall, and students finally started attending class there in January. The new school goes from kindergarten all the way to grade 12, and this year's grade 10 graduates will be the first in the community's history who can now stay for grade 11.
It just gives us the luxury of to keep our kids an extra 2 years rather than sending them out when they're 14. Give them 2 more years to get grade 12 and more experience in life.
There are nearly 600 kids living in the community, including Arthur Beardy. He's impressed by the sheer size of the new school.
It's a lot greater, I would say. Just big. That's all I can say.
Beardy says he's most excited by the new teaching facilities like the music room and woodshop. Something that's also important to Chief Morris, who hopes the students will get a leg up when it comes to future employment.
Because this school doesn't have the woodworking, the science room, the electrical. It didn't have that, But this new school, it has those facilities, so it'll give them more of a trades environment when they go to school.
Like many his age, Beardy's favorite class is gym, and he's not sure which of the new facilities he's most excited about. He's not even sure whether he might prefer to leave the community to finish high school.
While going to a new school, you meet new people, you meet, just tons of new stuff, but also you're just leaving stuff behind as well.
But Morris says that parents in the First Nation feel reassured to know that their kids are safe at home. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
And coming up after the break, we've got more news from KI with a funding announcement from Greg Rickford.
See, with climate change, the roads require some reconfiguration and additional support.
Kenora Rainy River MPP Greg Rickford has announced more than $500,000 in funding to KI First Nation for winter road upgrades and bridge repairs there. It's part of a $5 million investment budgeted by the province to shore up the winter road network. Rickford made the announcement in KI alongside Chief Donnie Morris. The work on the bridge which crosses the Fawn River will make it safer to travel the winter roads, which circle around Big Trout Lake before winding down towards Kingfisher Lake, more than 80 kilometers to the south.
We're here to announce more than $500,000 to the Nanuik Bridge rehabilitation. The Chief has mentioned that there's other infrastructure that we need to address, and we look forward to doing that. We've allocated an additional $5 million to the winter road network because we recognize increasingly that they're going to need constant upgrading, and obviously with climate change, the roads require some reconfiguration and additional support.
As you mentioned, climate change, it's something to be taken seriously. So these bridges will have an impact on us traveling out earlier and hauling heavier stuff.
The upgrades ring in at $571,000. Rickford calls the winter road network a vital link for remote communities. A 52-year-old man from Kenora is facing charges of impaired driving while in heavy equipment machinery after being pulled over by the Ontario Provincial Police. Just after 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, April 12th, members of the Kenora OPP responded to a traffic complaint of some heavy machinery being driven erratically within the city of Kenora. Once on scene, investigating officers determined that the driver of the heavy equipment was impaired by alcohol, with cans still sitting in the scoop loader. The driver was then placed under arrest and transported to the Kenora OPP detachment for further testing. The accused was charged with 2 impaired driving offenses and released until his next court date in June. Dryden OPP were on the scene of a serious collision just east of that community on Friday. Few details were available, but Highway 17 was closed since about 1 o'clock that afternoon. The highway was shut down all the way to Chappaqua at one point, but reopened partially, but was still closed later on Friday from Thunder Lake to Norwick. Meanwhile, several other highways were closed on Friday due to poor weather conditions, including Highway 622 between Atikokan and Ignace, and Highway 502 between Dryden and Fort Frances. Those routes are now reopened. A nationwide strike began on Wednesday by members of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. Here in the Northwest, around 400 union members are walking the picket lines, looking for support from the public in their fight for better wages from the Trudeau government. Jonathan Wilson was at a picket line in Thunder Bay and files this report.
Today, we're standing up for workers' rights, where we've walked out and we're on strike, currently picketing at Patty Haidu's office, and we're looking for a fair settlement in Ottawa.
Strike captain and PSAC Local 00030 President John Deptuck says they have around 400 union members around northwestern Ontario, including about 300 in Thunder Bay. Around 50 of them were picketing in front of the office of MP Patty Haidu, who is in Ottawa this week, and around 100 strikers were walking the sidewalk beside the Indigenous Services Canada office at the corner of William Street and Balmoral. The federal government is offering a wage increase of 9% spread out over 3 years. But Deptuck says that doesn't catch them up with inflation, which has totaled 13%.
We haven't had a wage increase since 2020, and we're falling behind with rising cost of living, and it's time for the government to come to the table and bring us a fair offer. In today's current inflation market, we're behind 13% currently. For every dollar that our membership's making, it equates to 87 cents in today's dollars. So.
The strike could lead to delays at places like the Passport office and with grain inspections at local elevators. However, some PSAC members are considered essential workers and will continue to report for duty.
The services that will be affected here in Thunder Bay are going to be grain inspection, it's going to be Canada Revenue Agency, Employment Insurance Benefits, Service Canada, and Passport Canada.
Deptuck says the local members voted overwhelmingly in favor of a strike mandate, and he hopes that sends a strong message to Ottawa that they won't settle for anything but a fair deal.
I'm optimistic that we're still at the bargaining table in Ottawa and we're still trying to make headway on a deal. I'm hoping that it doesn't become prolonged, but ultimately it's in the government's hands.
Jonathan Wilson, TBT News.
Organizers of a proposed non-motorized recreational trail network between Nipigon, Thunder Bay, and Atikokan are reaching out to the public for their thoughts on the project. The Northwestern Ontario Recreational Trails Association is holding public forums to allow community input on the proposed project. The group has a 5-year plan to develop nearly 500 kilometers of trails, with public information sessions being a provincial requirement for permission to build on Crown land. During the first meeting in O'Connor Township, some people voiced concerns about increased noise and people wandering over their property lines, with others questioning the non-motorized aspect of the trails. President Len Day says there would be issues with allowing vehicles like snowmobiles on the trail, with increased liability for land and property owners.
As soon as you introduce motorized use, your insurance rates go up exponentially, and of course, the trail quality has to improve as well. So these trails are just going to be a basic non-motorized trail to basically get us Thunder Bay to Atikokan, Thunder Bay to Nipigon, and Thunder Bay to the U.S. border.
The next public meeting is scheduled for this Tuesday at the Conmee Community Center. MPP Sol Mamakwa is questioning the Ford government about an Ontario Ombudsman report into the case of a 13-year-old girl from a Kenora area First Nation. She went missing 7 times in 2020 while she was supposed to be under the supervision of a Southern Ontario foster care agency. She eventually returned to the foster home herself after suffering a number of serious harms. The Ombudsman has sent out 23 recommendations for Anishinaabe Abinogi Family Services, which is based in Kenora.
Last week, the Ombudsman released a report on the failure of 3 care agencies to ensure the safety of First Nations girl who repeatedly went missing and when she was supposed to be receiving supervised services. This young woman should not have been harmed while under this care. What has this minister done to hold these child welfare agencies accountable for all the evidence that tells us they're not doing their jobs?
The events that are outlined in the Ombudsman report are absolutely unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. It's very clear. And as I mentioned, every single child, every single youth in our province needs to be in a safe and loving environment and a stable home. Again, regardless of whether they're in care, Mr. Speaker. The Ombudsman's report is going to be helpful as we are embarking on a child welfare redesign across the province.
It's time now for another short break, but coming up, the alternative route proposed for the Waasigan transmission line is rejected by Hydro One.
Pretty disgusted because I thought we were making progress.
Representatives from Hydro One met with members of the Neighbours on the Line committee this week to discuss their final selection for the Waasigan transmission line route. The drop-in sessions were open to the public as Hydro One officials faced more heated questions from concerned community members. Carl Lagden reports.
Tensions were noticeably high on Tuesday afternoon at the Cam Community Centre. Hydro One's ultimate decision offered little reassurance to the community, where a series of billboards containing bar graphs compared the residents' alternate route to the utility's preferred route. Some affected residents expressed confusion over what figures the graphs referred to, Neighbors on the Line organizers say they had previously discussed mitigating solutions with Hydro One, but came to the conclusion that they ultimately would not be possible.
So with their proposal of mitigation, which they proposed in January, it simply doesn't work, and now we are back to square one. This is a crossroads, I feel, in how our community will have to shift its action steps in regards to facing this challenge.
Hydro One's Director of Strategic Project Delivery, Sunny Karanakaran, remains optimistic, saying he looked forward to future opportunities to work directly with homeowners in an effort to find individual means of mitigating the impact of the line to their property.
So we've had a great discussion. We're looking forward to meeting with each of the individual landowners, and we're looking forward to the opportunity of working collaboratively to find the solutions that are specific for their property.
Community members we spoke to expressed dissatisfaction about the drop-in session, having expected a formal announcement by Hydro One.
Well, I haven't really heard anything from Hydro One. I thought there was going to be a meeting, between 3 and 5 where we would come and sort of hear more about what's happening. But when I have arrived, I've discovered that the posters are already up and they've already made their decision, and they're going to go with the original proposed line.
I'm pretty disgusted, because I thought we were making progress. By the looks at all these signs, we haven't got a hope in Hades.
So I guess now the next step would be for them to start expropriating land.
Hydro One has consistently emphasized a willingness to work with affected homeowners towards solutions, even going so far as to unequivocally state that through engagement with their solutions, no homeowners will be displaced. Though the neighbors on the line remain largely skeptical and frustrated by what they've described as a misrepresentation of the facts on the part of Hydro One. Carl Langdon, TBT News.
And that's all the time we have for this week's edition of Northwest Newsweek. We hope to see you again next time.